All right, thank you. Name is Jason Wolfe. I'm from FortisBC. We are a natural gas, electricity, and alternative energy supplier in British Columbia. We have over 1 million customers that we serve all the way from the tip of Vancouver Island all the way up into northern BC. We're owned by a parent, Fortis Inc., which is headquartered in Eastern Canada, and that company owns a lot of electrical generation companies in North America, all the way down into Belize as well. The question or the comment that you had that came up earlier about, well, it doesn't sound like the resource industry, the oil and gas industry, it's not very technological. There's a lot of guys with gray hair working there. Why would I want to work there if I was young? It is very much on the leading edge. In fact, if it wasn't on the leading edge, we wouldn't have all the things that we do today. If you think about energy, energy is foundational to everything we do. You have to have that energy input to produce what's in the mines. For the clothes that you wear, your iPods, et cetera, all take energy to produce the materials that go in them, and often it takes energy to actually use that piece of equipment in the case of, say, electricity for an iPad. So it's foundational. What we do in that industry helps you. And if you think of the oil and gas industry, part of what I'm from, and think about what's happened to pricing over the last, say, decade, and something that occurred was a technology where drilling became horizontal using GPS. And what occurred with that was that you now had a reduction in the price that it took to drill for gas or oil. And you've seen that in the collapse in oil prices. It's driven by this new technology. You've seen it in BC, and we'll get to some of the pricing, but the price in BC for natural gas has dropped dramatically. And so that's all a result of technology. We're not at the leading edge of some things. So if you think of Amazon and you're going to go buy a book, it's very seamless. Well, we at Fortis just implemented a system whereby if you need new gas service at your house or your business, you can go online, you tell us what you need, how much gas you're going to use, where your house is located, and then our systems will go back, it'll talk to the SAP system for our billing and get all your account information. It'll talk to our GIS system to find out where the pipes are, see if there's enough gas. It'll then talk to our scheduling system so that the crew can go out to your home and put in that pipe. Now, Amazon did that a long time ago. We just put that in, but we're actually the first gas utility in North America to go straight from sitting at your home, clicking on your computer, to having a crew come to your house and install a service. And so, not quite cutting edge like Amazon, but still very much cutting edge when you think of all the systems. Let's take a step back, though, and talk again about that foundational amount of energy. Where does energy come from in British Columbia? And you can see from this slide, the largest component of energy is in the liquid fuels, so that's all your transportation needs. The next largest source of energy comes from natural gas, and that's primarily for your heating needs, hot water, space heating, also for your manufacturing needs, process. We heard about, Canfor and how they used a bunch of energy, and they're a great customer of ours, and they want to use less of our product through efficiency, but that's a good thing. You see at the bottom there, it says that natural gas consumption is 200 million gigajoules. So that's a lot of energy. What's interesting about that slide, speaking of technology though, is that 200 million number has stayed that way for over a decade, while we've been adding 15,000 customers a year on average. Yet consumption has not increased. And the reason for that is fairly simple technology. High-efficient furnaces, high-efficient boilers. Customers are moving them out. Our industrial customers are taking energy efficiency initiatives. So overall, the consumption in the province is staying the same, yet we are adding a significant number of customers over that time. You'll also see that the energy used or the natural gas supplies a little bit more than what is supplied by our electricity system. And that's significant too. It's important to have a diverse energy stream, but what would happen if you took out that natural gas stream, and how would you replace it, say, with electricity? You would obviously have to double the system, and to put that in simple terms, you're looking at 10 to 15 Site Cs just of generation alone to make up that difference. So it's a vitally important source of energy for our province. Speaking of efficiency and where that cost driver has come, you can see there that the price of gas, and I've changed it all over to cents per kilowatt hour for easy comparison. The price of natural gas, including carbon tax for our residential customers, is 3.7 cents a kilowatt hour. For our commercial customers and industrial, it's even lower than that. And that compares very favorably, you can see, with hydro, and that's important too, just from an economic standpoint in the province. It's much cheaper to heat your home now than it was in 2008, when that price was a lot closer to 8-9 cents. But it's also a reflection of that technology and the fact that the price to extract natural gas from northern BC now is $2 a gigajoule, speaking back in gigajoules again, when in 2009 it was around $10, all because of technology. But I'm not going to talk any more about that. I'm going to talk about something else, something that we are doing at FortisBC, and we're the only utility in North America that has a program of this, and it's renewable natural gas. Renewable natural gas is taking gas from natural sources in their life cycle, so we're not talking about it staying in the ground for 100 million years first. We are taking natural sources and then creating a product you can use in your home the same as the natural gas that you currently use or in your business. In this case, you see a picture of a cow, a landfill, and you produce methane, not from the cow directly, actually from the manure. Methane comes off of landfills as well. If you can clean that up, process that, then we can put it in our pipes and we can deliver it to you in your home. As one of my staff says, we're the only utility that he knows that, serves you right from the back of the cow right to your furnace. However, right now, renewable natural gas just makes up a very small portion of our portfolio. The big green circle there represents the 200 million gigajoules that we serve in British Columbia. And there's a very small slice there, 250,000 gigajoules. That's of the existing renewable natural gas portfolio that we have. The slightly larger light blue slice there is the potential from those basic sources or the more common sources, the landfills, the wastewater treatment plants, the green waste. That's 8.5 million gigajoules. So right now we know that we can go out in British Columbia and get about that much. It takes a couple of years to produce to construct each of these facilities, but we know that's available right now. The big elephant in the room, and we've talked a lot about it today, is the forestry side of things, and that's the blue circle at the bottom. That represents 300 million gigajoules worth of natural gas potential per year from forestry. And that's not cutting down new trees, that's just in the waste side. And so we heard about biofuels, we heard about diesel, et cetera. This is another option that's out there. The challenge is that we don't have that technology right now. There are two projects, one in Alberta and one in Ontario, that are trying to get to taking that waste wood and creating gas at the quality you can put it in a pipeline, and we aren't there yet. So let's talk about the projects that we do have running right now. There are 4 projects there. 2 are agriculture and 2 are landfills. The agriculture ones are in Delta and Abbotsford. And in that case, they're taking the waste, the manure, from the dairy cows. They're also taking waste from restaurants, so fryer waste, food waste at the end of the day, waste from grocery stores, so rather than just putting it in dumpsters, as well as green waste from cities. That waste then goes into an anaerobic digester, and you put the bacteria in there, and the bacteria are what create the methane. And that's actually the exact same process that occurs in a landfill. Landfill just occurs naturally over many years. In the Fraser Valley Biogas there in Seabreeze, we're trying to speed that up to produce methane right away quickly. And then once that methane is produced, it still has a lot of water, a lot of CO2 in it, and we have to take that out before we bring it into the pipeline. The 2 landfill operations are ones we own, actually, both in Salmon Arm and Kelowna. And the landfills are all required to capture their methane. So they already do that right now, but they have to They used to vent it, now they flare it. So it's a waste of energy. It's not used for anything. So what we do there is we take that methane that has already been captured in the pipes, and we clean that up. That's a little more complex than just the anaerobic digester, because in that case, what we actually have to do is take out some of those other chemicals, and you can imagine what's in a landfill, all kinds of chemicals and nasty things that we actually have to take out of that methane before we can put it in our pipeline. But that's a good thing too, because that's not going up in the air. So let's talk now about the demand side. The supply side, those 4 projects, as I showed you, produce about 250,000 gigajoules a year. We have a few more projects coming on. This is the demand side, and it's quite interesting, actually, a study in human behavior as well. We have about 8,000 customers that have voluntarily signed up. So these are customers that want renewable natural gas, and they are willing to pay more for it. And we'll get to a slide on the actual price of that in a bit. But we did some surveys of customers because we wanted to know before we started this program in about 2010, was anyone actually interested in this? We hear in the media about the desire for renewable fuels, but what were our customers thinking? We did the survey, we saw that there's enough support. A lot of people said they wanted it, and there's support, so we went ahead, and this is a graph that demonstrates what that customer makeup is like. So the majority of customers buy a percentage of renewable natural gas. Rather than buying 100% of it and displacing all their regular natural gas, what they do instead is they just buy a percentage. And so the largest portion there you can see is the 5% or the 10%. And so for a residential customer, that represents somewhere between $5 and $10 a month premium. We've had a lot of uptake in the last 6 months as well, as we've dropped the price a little bit, and people are becoming more aware of this. And so the majority of those customers that you see there are residential customers as well. The program is open to our commercial and our industrial customers, but the challenge there that we face, and we do have some commercial customers, but the problem seems to be price. Our residential customers may opt into it, and it's a small change on their bill. As I said, the $6 to $8 a month, and that's pretty reasonable when you think bills have gone down in the hundreds of dollars per year over the last 5 or 6 years. We've had a variety of commercial customers that have become renewable natural gas customers, and they did it usually for reasons that they wanted to be a little cleaner, a little greener. They saw it as a marketing opportunity. But then after taking the gas for a while, they've moved off. And in our research, what we found was that they were price sensitive, and they didn't feel that it was actually giving them a benefit that outweighed that price difference. And so that's an interesting thing. While there's a great demand and a desire to move in the direction of the renewable fuels, the uptake isn't quite there yet. We certainly have a lot more work to do ourselves, though, in educating our customers on it. I'm sure that as I'm talking about this, most of you didn't know about it or are only now becoming familiar with it. So we have to do more work to educate our customers. But it is an interesting change. This is a facility that's going to open in June. It's with the city of Surrey, and so we've worked with them for a number of years, creating the agreements. And what Surrey is going to do is they are going to bring their green curbside collection bins. They're going to pick those up, and they're going to put them into a central facility where they're going to have an anaerobic digester, just like those farms. And so all the city residents, their waste that comes from their house is going to go to that facility. They're going to produce the RNG from that facility. We're going to buy it from them. We're going to move it through our system, and we're going to sell it back to them so that they can then use it in their fleet vehicles for waste hauling. So that waste hauler that is going and picking up the green waste is being powered actually by the green waste itself after a bit of processing. So that's the first instance in North America that we know that that's actually happened, which is a pretty cool occurrence. So that'll occur in June this year, I think, is when they are going to go live. Lastly on this, even though the technology is new, the price is actually still competitive. You saw this slide earlier. I've inserted now the renewable natural gas component of that, and you can see at 100% renewable natural gas, it's still less than that tier 1 electricity. So from our perspective, it's a great option for customers who are looking for something in the renewable space. Maybe their needs are different and electricity doesn't meet that need, and instead they could reuse renewable natural gas. Our challenge as a company, though, is to find more renewable natural gas, to bring more on, to crack that nut that is the wood waste, and how do we get renewable natural gas out of that? Because if we could do that, the possibilities are endless, and they're so much so that we could perhaps supply all of British Columbia with renewable natural gas. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for staying and listening, and I hope you have a great conference.
So my name is Gonzalo Tudela. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vandrico Solutions. We create operational productivity software through IoT for the mining space and work typically in underground operations. So it's a very short presentation. I got 9 minutes. I got a little timer here. It's starting pretty soon. Really, there are 3 fundamental pieces when you look at IoT, and you want to make sure that you hit these 3 fundamental pieces. And then some of them are already known. The first one is you got to make sure that the use case is large enough for the investment that you're going to be going after. The second thing is you have to understand how is this all going to tie in together, the platform, the technology piece. And there's a third piece that most people haven't followed or figured out quite yet, and it's the rules engine behind that technology that ties it all together. So firstly, being on the clean tech side, I wanted to kind of paint a picture of what mining is looking like right now. So mining is spending $26 billion a year on ICT. Right? And most people are thinking, like, are they innovative? Are they spending a lot of money on technology? They're already there. They are spending a lot, and this is growing at a rate of about 5% per year. But when you break that down, the biggest growth sector there is in the smart mine. The smart mine is where all the mine and the connected assets, and everyone's talking about it. You know, Goldcorp had a presentation with Microsoft this morning. They were talking about the HoloLens, the real-time visualization. And essentially, the smart mine is where everything is connected and operating in unison. And it's heading towards full automation. Those pieces in IoT are where we are today. And when you look at the mining sector and you say, okay, well, the smart mining, the use cases are basically drawn on 3 driving factors. And so again, that first pillar of how IoT and mining work together and how any project should work is trying to understand those use cases. So the 3 things are mine worker safety. The most important asset of any operation is its people. People drive everything, and the safety of a miner is always number 1. The second thing, and most people don't know this, but energy consumption in a mine is one of the largest overall costs of production. And so if you look at the use case around how can we use IoT to help with energy consumption, there's another piece there. And the third one is around production optimization. So production optimization and cost efficiencies, such as making sure that the trucks that are rated for carrying 100 tons and can do a cycle from the ore through to the ore pile in 15 minutes is operating at 4 per hour. You know, that optimization is a key piece. So in an underground mine, this is what it looks like. Right? You have a lot of different things that can be connected and can intertwine. And what do people see here? Raise a hand. What do you see? No one's. There we go. What do you see? Ventilation. Boom. That's a big one. What else do we see? Power. What else do we see? Water. Lots of water. We see trucks. We see potential barricades. We see communication systems. There's lots and lots of things, and people completely underestimate the complexity of a mine. The mines today are extremely complex. And IoT has always been there. It's just been called SCADA. But now it's, you know, being up in the cloud, and there's all this infrastructure requirements. But when we're trying to drive that business value, you understand all these pieces. But I think the very first one here was ventilation. And when you look at ventilation, ventilation costs up to 50% of the energy consumption in a mine. It's a very large amount. So when you're looking at something that costs between, you know, let's round numbers, between 20 and 30% of overall operational productivity costs, ventilation is a big one. But in a global situation, when you look at mining, and the estimates vary depending on which person you're looking at and which person you're talking to, the total worldwide output and the worldwide energy consumption coming from mining is 4.4 to 7%. So if you think half of energy consumption at a mine is ventilation, and between 4 and 7.5%. So now we're talking about if you can make an effect on ventilation, you could probably reduce the worldwide global consumption of energy by 2%. That's a big, big number. So again, I said mining was complicated. There's lots of different assets. So the thing where ventilation gets really, really cool is this concept called ventilation on demand. And it's something that's been going on for almost 10 years now. It's really starting to come to fruition. You're starting to see a lot more stories. They've ironed out all the kinks, but this is all fundamentally in IoT. And when you look at a mine, there's lots of different assets. And what we're looking at is one level of the mine where you see people, where you see trucks, where you see vehicles, where you see the types of vehicles, the alerts that are happening, and in there are sensors. And so the way that IoT affects ventilation and cost savings is ventilation on demand. It's knowing where the people are, where the vehicles are, knowing how much of air is required in what part of the tunnel, and shutting off and closing doors in other parts to drive efficiency. And ventilation demand is a use case from IoT. It has come together and it's saved about 30% of the ventilation costs at some of these mines. So that second piece, the first piece again was talking about the use case, making sure it made sense. Second piece is understanding the overall context, the data together. The third piece is the values in the rules engine. And this is something that's sort of a newer understanding. What I mean by the values in the rules engine is the context. When you can start to automate the flow of who does what and when, you really stop to optimize a mine. So we've said in the ventilation context, when there's enough people and there's a lot of vehicles and assets, turn off some ventilation as required, shut doors. But in the people side, as things happen, as there's too much sulfur dioxide in this area, evacuate that section of a mine. As a machine goes down, create an emergency work order to get the nearest trained certified mechanic to bring that machine up back to space, up to production. So the third piece that how mining and IoT are working together is around this rules-based engine. And the only way to get the true understanding, the value and the use case in all of this is to do things in an agile manner. So if you are following the space right now, Barrick is investing $100 million in 2017 to digitizing their Cortez operation in Nevada. That $100 million is being done in an agile way. That means limited scope, doing things every 8 weeks, giving it something to the user, and learning as fast as possible. They're already on their third cycle. And Barrick has been able to achieve more in the first 3 months of this year than they have in any other year in production. It's fantastic, and you should watch it. So, I don't want to get too deep, but I'm going to allow a couple minutes for questions. I know this is fast and furious, but you remember those three things: finding the use case, making sure all the data is together and connected, and the rules-based engine is where the value is. Does anyone have any questions? Why is my focus on underground? For a couple reasons. So underground, the market is starting to head more towards underground because it's harder to find ore body and assets. So what you're starting to see is deeper and deeper mines. So first off, there's a trend towards underground. The second reason is if you look at the adoption of Wi-Fi infrastructure in underground, we're moving from leaky feeder to Wi-Fi. So now you're seeing companies like Boliden and Barrick and Rio Tinto and Goldcorp put Wi-Fi access points, full coverage over their mines. And when you have Wi-Fi, imagine how much was done when your phone started getting connected. A lot. Now imagine you're underground and you had very limited bandwidth connection, radio only, leaky feeder type stuff. Now there's Wi-Fi. Now innovation can really flourish in there. So that's the main reason why we choose working with underground. I've got time for one more question. Yes? How do you monitor people's behavior? So what do you mean more specifically? Very good question. So we've tested multiple different types of devices on workers, from watches to phones with tablets. We're now working with Deloitte and Cortex on a smart helmet clip. We'll be showing it tomorrow at the World's Run Right. And they all offer various types of things. So if you think of a watch, you can get information kind of like a Fitbit would give you. Just tune it a little more towards production. So instead of saying how many steps did someone take, what you're saying is how much active drilling was done, because you can feel the vibration of that, right? So there's an element there, and the second is on heart rate. There's barriers to that, right? From personal privacy to the actual ergonomics of a watch and the gloves. So watch isn't always the best thing. But the smart helmet clip is probably, it's got a lot of potential. We're looking at something with Tata Steel right now. And the way that is essentially it's personalized sensors, fall detection, all the things you would do from a watch, but with the power of an Android phone. So you would have the capacity to send work orders and alerts. Well, that's it for me. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to grab me on the side. I'd be happy to answer. Take care.
Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be here. I had two technology choices for this presentation, both which are cynically called death by PowerPoint or nausea by Prezi. So I went with Prezi, so I didn't want to kill anybody today. It's a pleasure to share with you today some of our experiences in marrying a mining sector movement of openly sharing data and the emerging technologies that can make that happen. And if successfully wed, unlocking the value that can be found in open data. There's my first Prezi thing. Where should I point this thing? At you, maybe? Here, maybe? Behind me, maybe? So I'm pushing the green arrow. It worked at lunchtime today. Shall I try again? Oh, I'm at the end of the presentation. Okay. Can you take me to... Okay, you get to see the whole thing here. Yeah, drag that thing all the way across. Beautiful. Make that bigger. Voila, technology in action. My name is Bruce Madu. I'm the Vice President of Mining and Minerals at Geoscience, BC. I am a geologist and capable of making this talk a bit techie. If I lose you somewhere along the way, let's sort it out in a pub. I would recommend Mahoney's just down below here. Geoscience BC is a publicly funded organization that generates earth science in collaboration with First Nations, the resources sector, universities, governments, and communities. My presentation today describes a project that is underway by two organizations and several supporting partners. Canada Mining Innovation Council is the project lead, and their mandate is to fundamentally transform mining through innovation. Additionally, we are collaborating with the mining sector, government, and communities whose insights are giving the project the best chance for success. Over the last year, the scoping of a mining industry knowledge hub has been underway. The hub would be a data discovery tool where a broad network of users can go to acquire, interrogate, and visualize water quality data hosted in an online map environment. And most importantly, data that currently has no home and often goes missing is preserved for future use. Why is this project important? The mining sector has faced challenges in recent years with protracted periods of low metal prices. Ranked next to very specific risks such as cash optimization, access to capital and productivity, are social license to operate and transparency. These two risks yield many opportunities as communities increase the role they play in the sector's success. Firmly embedded within social acceptance and transparency is the availability, wise use, and protection of water. From some perspectives, a successful mine is better described as an effective water management plan that produces metals. We are seeing movement in the mineral sectors as concepts of corporate social responsibility mature. Recent conclusions that it meant responsible exploration and mining have given way to more socially focused perspectives such as community and capacity development, and in modern CSR efforts, a recognition that issues which previously separated corporate from community interests are actually foundations from which shared values can be built. The stewardship of water is such a value, and the sector or its associations are formalizing their commitments. In January of this year, the International Council on Mining and Minerals, whose member companies account for 1/3 of global mining activity, announced their commitment to water stewardship in a document shown in this slide. Minerals, as a resource, have followed different paths for Indigenous peoples who for generations sought them for tools, ceremonial and trading purposes, and early settlers who came in search of the riches, such as gold. Today, British Columbia is on the path of reconciling its relations with First Nations. A new history is being created from level government to government tables, corporate engagement, business agreements, through to equity enterprises and modern forms of Indigenous government. Water stewardship will play a central role in new relationships, as new relationships are recognized as shared values, such as fisheries and clean drinking water are pursued. So what role can Geoscience BC, the Canada Mining Innovation, and our partners play? Collectively, we must ask ourselves, first, how are a healthy society and the environment and resources connected? We believe the answer to be balanced and informed resource management decisions that draw from the best information available. The world is awash in data, and many sessions at this summit will highlight this. The mining sector, as well, is awash with water quality data, but much of it resides on paper in thick binders, Adobe export documents, or spreadsheets in various formats. So the next question is, how can we use technology to add meaning and purpose to data, make information of it, and facilitate the development of intelligence? Technology is challenging organizations to discover a state of information democracy. Unrestricted access to data, but without governance, releasing the right data at the right time, can be described as information anarchy. Perhaps this in some ways describes social media. Data concentrated in the hands of a few with limited access to others describes an information dictatorship, perhaps a traditional corporation with data held in departmental silos. A balance of access and control in an information democracy includes consistent information governance with decentralized access to data and decision making. Google's mission echoes this by striving to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. That was Prezi, isn't that cool? And I see no nausea yet. The empowerment that accompanies information is not new, but technology is certainly rebalancing access and control scenarios. The word cloud here contains one of my favorite words, democratization. In adapting common definitions of democratization, this project we're working on could be described in this way: exploring how to make water quality information available to all people, and by extension, make it possible for all people to understand water quality information. If you support open access, use, modification, and sharing of your data, what could you expect? You should expect innovation, which might lead to new techniques and discoveries. The left image shows a helicopter tree sampling program we completed that measures the amount of metals a tree has drawn up from surrounding soils and concentrated in its branches. Potentially a technique that will help discover hidden and remote mineralization. All this data publicly available as open data. You should expect renewed evaluation of opportunities. This image in the center shows the Huckleberry Mine, where open data from a regional airborne geophysical program helped discover new ore, extending the mine life for 2 years and protecting over 200 jobs. Additionally, you should expect reduced duplication of data collection by ensuring archived data can always be found. You should expect environmental assessments that are more efficient with broader social acceptance. And you should expect solid baseline scenarios for cumulative impact predictions and studies. Well, let's look a little closer at this project. I'd like to introduce you to Rick, not his actual name, but our fictional water quality expert for the day. The person in the photo actually is a dedicated scientist who does work for Geoscience BC on innovative projects. And in this photo is working on new technology for rapid water analysis in the field. We'll talk about that some other time. Like other professionals in his field, Rick's confident his data will show responsibility in protecting water quality, but something's uncertain. He's keen to show everyone he's doing a good job and very interested in the data movement. And he's also aware that often mistrust can lead to barriers, whether to informed decisions or in some cases actual barriers on the road to your project. Well, there's good news for Rick. He's not the only one that wants to share data. The exploration and mining sector creates vast amounts of it, from bedrock mapping, chemistry of soils, drill core results, to extensive environmental baseline and operational data. Governments are the data custodian for much of this immense amount of data and are increasingly open sharing it through a variety of initiatives. Traditional knowledge of First Nations derived from experiential data while living in close contact with nature throughout generations is also finding its place alongside Western knowledge systems. Mashing so much data together is daunting, but where possible, it is an important goal. Where do I find this data? Well, you could build your own GIS system. These systems yield the most options for working with data, but can be out of reach for many companies, individuals, or organizations. Paper reports are regrettably still a common format for information, and although they can be scanned, which helps, deriving data from them is difficult. Fortunately, technology is on our side, allowing us to surf other people's GIS systems, often for free. These web-based tools take advantage of in-memory technology to allow users to mash up data from multiple sources, explore it interactively, without even having to make inquiries at every step. Without appreciating it, many of us use these daily for things like reserving a car to go, finding a restaurant, or where your cat goes at night, if Cuddles is willing to wear a wearable GPS technology collar. And scientists like Rick are an important part of this movement. These are just a few examples of data discovery tools that serve data and other information for large land or resource managing organizations. There are several sites hosted by the BC government, including the award-winning Geological Survey MapPlace, which was an early adopter of emerging technologies in the 1990s. First Nation sites are common, such as the Silcotin National Government site and the Tahltan Nation Development Corporation site. And Geoscience BC has its own Earth Science Viewer, our web-based application that serves our project data and reports. It also allows users to bring data together from other sites and plan their search for the next discoveries, make resource management decisions, or learn about mineral and energy opportunities. Our experience in developing this viewer has allowed us to play an important role in the development of the Mining Industry Knowledge Hub. So here it is, looking at the Mining Industry Knowledge Hub project. A platform that brings together many sources of water quality data has been conceptualized. The figure shows a base map of British Columbia and a selection of the data that's available. The red circle on the map highlights the location of data submitted to the BC Environmental Assessment Office for the purpose of permitting a mine. The blue circle shows data currently held by the BC Ministry of Environment, a massive database that very recently became publicly available through an open data initiative. At this scale, many of the data points are aggregated. The BC Ministry of Environment data release is a good example of what can happen when you share your digital data. This Knowledge Hub project downloaded it, added value to it, and posted it to this concept site for potential public use for what I believe is the first time. The black circle shows industry data collected by mine operators to meet their regulatory and corporate requirements. So you can see in one single site, we've pulled together data sources that have never seen the light of day and never been beside each other, all plotted on a common base. Zooming in, this view shows the location of industry-generated data for the Mount Polley mine, one of our sector partners, plotted on a satellite background. Users would be able to query each point and learn about water quality for a variety of parameters such as metal content, pH, or dissolved solids. A common frustration with users and industry and the public is not knowing if any data at all exists for an area. The simple action of sharing data locations, maybe not the details, and contact information is thought to be a valuable step ahead towards a modern data discovery service. A final knowledge hub could accommodate a sign-in to access particular data if sharing concerns might exist. Here we see the details of water quality at a specific point at the end of the red arrow. The red arrow is a point I clicked on, and it opened up analytical results for copper plotted against time. As more sampling occurs over time, users of this data will be able to see what are the longer-term changes in water quality. Useful additions to this graph might be a line that shows permitted discharge levels for copper, drinking water standards, or other thresholds that might be of relevance to site users. Early in the project, it was recognized that data is shared in many formats, and that while standardization will be important in the future, historical data may need to be included as it exists. Here, a baseline study of water quality for an environmental assessment exists as a PDF file, and the Knowledge Hub serves it as a full digital report. It is forecasted that environmental assessments in the future will indeed include digital data, enabling a more thorough democratization. Since the Canada Mining Innovation Council is a nationally focused organization, the intent is to explore and develop similar hubs across the nation. This should drive standardized reporting, enabling the sector, governments, and communities to make broad statements on the state of water quality in the nation. Well, it appears Rick is realizing the value of open data to enable the most informed decisions from the data he's collected. Now it's your turn. If you are in the natural resource sector, where are you on this dial? Do you produce data, information, or intelligence? Are you moving your dial to the right or to the left? What is your role in an information democracy? How can increased Indigenous involvement improve this process? How can data, information, and intelligence affect your relationships and good decision making? Well, for a scientist who has moved a long way toward better corporate and social responsibility during the time of his talk, Rick hasn't actually moved much from the rock he's been sitting on. He's been a little bit static. But nonetheless, his story marries cool science with innovations in information technology while putting into action the water stewardship values he shares with all British Columbians. I thank you for your time today. That's the end of my presentation.
And I'll start off by saying, as you probably have gathered, I'm working with a mining company, Imperial Metals, so my background is pretty much in the mining industry and geology. And Mike is with the Canadian Mining Innovation Council, so we might be a little bit mining-centric with the discussion. But certainly from the presentations that I've heard today, I think what we're going to touch on, what we're going to talk about is probably going to be a cross-sector in terms of the natural resource industries, that I think we're facing a lot of the same challenges. So, Mike, over to you.
All right, thanks, Lynn. One word that we commonly hear, it's becoming a bit of a buzzword in the mining industry, is disrupt. So disruptive mining, disruptive technologies. Just at PDAC, just about over a week ago, there was an event called Disrupt Mining. And so we heard a lot of different innovative and exciting technologies throughout the presentations, but I was hoping you could speak to some other disruptive technologies that you think will reshape the technology and innovation landscape in the resource sectors.
Well, I'm going to start by cheating a little bit because I heard some very interesting stuff today, and I'm going to reference that, particularly just one of the last talks, the smart mining, Internet of Things. I think that's going to be huge for our industry. Locke's talk on genomics and bringing in the whole biological and genetic aspects of what we can understand about our environment, how we can apply that to mining. Another topic, and Bruce just spoke about this, the whole issue of not just open data, but also big data. There is so much going on. And one of the reasons that I'm disappointed to not see more people in this room is because there's so many advancements in big data, in data management, in data interpretation, 3D visualization, in terms of artificial intelligence, neural networks, all sorts of really interesting ways to analyze the enormous amounts of data that go into, again, the mining industry, and I think for oil and gas you can say the same, for forestry the same. We generate a whole lot of data, and in order to understand that information, get the best value for that information, there's tremendous opportunities for development of software, visualization, as I say, artificial intelligence. Lots of work is being done. I think the mining industry in a lot of ways is at the forefront of that, but I think there's lots more that can be done. John Thompson, who was here, I don't know if he's still in the room, talked about as well ore sensing. Being able to, as a mining company, be able to know right at the scoop what you've got in the bucket before it goes into processing, and that allows us to really reduce our footprint by only moving as much material as we need to, and hopefully, ultimately, if we can extract in place. And right now we can do that for some commodities, but not all. And that's, I think, a place where we can really disrupt the sector when we can figure out how to get more metals out of the ground without disturbing much of the ground. So that overall reduction of our footprint is also reduction in energy consumption. It was really interesting to hear the Rio Tinto story and how much they've reduced, I think by 50%, their energy consumption. This is a big thing in the oil and gas sector. A huge story coming out of the forestry sector that there's all cogeneration, so much advancement in terms of energy efficiency and also contributing to the generation of new energy. And that, I think, is going to be another, the biofuels, biomaterials, that's really quite fascinating. But I would say that one of the places that I consider to be one of the biggest challenges, and again, the makeup and the number of people in this room really speak to a big challenge that I think we have in the resource sectors, and that's the whole innovation and social engagement. As John said, we don't have a lot of young people in this room. I think we have even a fewer percentage of young people in our industries. I think one of the forestry presentations touched on that. Certainly anybody in the mining industry will tell you that. I'm not sure oil and gas is much better, but we have a demographic that is going to be challenged as we go forward. We also have a challenge with social engagement, and Bruce touched on that in terms of making data open, being more transparent, figuring out how to engage more with the public. So to me, one of the biggest innovations that I think we need to figure out how to make is to better engage with the public so the public understands us better, understands the importance of our industry, because even as we move forward with new technologies, green technologies, they're going to need our industries, the public. We are all going to need all of these industries. They're not going to go away. The resource sector is a foundational sector that is going to underpin our standard of living, our society in so many ways. So something that Trevor said as well, the natural resource sector is a clean tech sector. And I think that's also very true, and that may be part of that misperception is we haven't made that connection. Also, we're very much a high-tech sector, which is exactly what we've been hearing about today. We've got to figure out how to get that message out there, engage the public and the youth. And again, is John Thompson in the room? There he is. John, perfect timing, because what I was going to say is we're going to do a little back and forth here, and then one of the things I want John to say a few words about is a conference that he's planning for 2018 called Resources for Future Generation, because I don't know if you heard just as you walked back in, but I think one of our challenges is that engagement. Oh yeah, okay, so now, John, say a few words about, there's a microphone right there, about Resources for Future Generations.
Okay, since you give me the space.
I put you on the spot.
How are we doing? Okay, since you give me the space, I'll say a few. Thanks very much, Len. So in this center, the convention center here in June 2018, we have a conference called Resources for Future Generations. And so we're going to discuss some of the things we've been talking about today, but in the context of energy, minerals, and water, and the underlying context of the Earth and the challenges that the Earth both offers us and constrains us in how we do resources in a clean and sustainable manner going forward. And we're also going to touch on resources in society, so our roles with people, and I touched on that briefly in my talk at the beginning here. What is the people equation here in the resource sector? Our employees, but also communities, First Nations, and so on. And most importantly, because of the title Resources for Future Generations, is what does the future generation think about this whole business, which is not enough because they're not here in the room. How do we engage them effectively? How do we attract them to our business? And how do we work with them? And that's young people from all dimensions, both in Canada but internationally as well. So it's a very ambitious undertaking to attract enough attention to this sector, the natural resource sector, to highlight both our challenges and the huge opportunities that are in the sector. So there's not enough people in the room here to do a big sales pitch, but I hope all of you are good interested in this and get on board, because it's a big opportunity, not just for the people who are involved in the sector, but for BC and for Canada to demonstrate that we can do natural resources. It's fundamental to our economy, but we can do it well and we can do it effectively, and we can do it to provide benefits to everybody. How's that?
That's perfect. Thanks, John. The timing was absolutely perfect.
So the next question that I had, and John had mentioned this in your talk, and we heard it a few other times throughout some of the other presentations, but in terms of the new models for innovation and technology, we talked about partnerships and collaboration. At CMIC, the Canada Mining Innovation Council, collaboration is the name of the game. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the current models for innovation and some of the new and emerging models, such as partnerships.
All right. Well, traditionally, there are lots of different ways of innovating, and they're all happening all the time. There's in-house companies. Some bigger companies have more R&D in-house than others. Smaller companies, not so much. But there's still always innovation happening in-house. There's what's done in universities and academia. There's innovation in government. There's innovation that consultants and service providers do for their clients or building their own businesses. But each of those has their advantages and disadvantages. And certainly from just my own experience in-house, it's often a question of capacity and time available. Because, for instance, in our company, we are always collecting enormous amounts of data. In fact, in Bruce's talk, he showed data from the Mount Poly mine. And the environmental team that collects all that water quality data are collecting samples every day and getting hundreds of analyses done. And all of that data gets reported to the government every month and every quarter and every year. We are reporting, collecting and reporting, but not a lot of time for actually analyzing and interpreting that data. So going to academia, then you have people who have more time, but then can't always, and I'm speaking from the industry perspective again, and innovation in the industry perspective. But if you have just academia trying to do your R&D, there is the question of time. And academic basic research usually takes more time than the industry actually feels they have available. And in government, it can be a question of government priorities. I worked 20 years for the government, so take no offense when I say it's a bit bureaucratic in government, and that can influence what you have, time available or what you can do in that environment. Again, lots of good science, lots of good R&D being done there. And with consultants and service providers, I think it's the same thing. Where can you carve out the time to develop that information? And if you're an industry using consultants and service providers for your information and innovation, it can be very expensive. There can be a question of where's the intellectual property going to sit. But where there's a real opportunity, and it's already happening in a lot of places, the forestry industry is doing this, oil and gas, mining. In fact, Canadian Mining Innovation Council is an example. Geoscience BC is an example. COSIA, I think FP Innovations would qualify in this way as well, where we have essentially a niche organization whose role is to bring all those different spaces and players together, where you've got industry, you have academia, you have government, and you have service providers who are working together, so you can take advantage of all the positives of those and try to diminish some of the challenges of either time or resources or capacity, and you get excellent value on the dollars invested by working in partnership. So for me, I think Our future models of innovation are very much going to be based on some of those well-integrated partnerships. And again, touching on the social engagement side, I think the part of this that we really need to keep growing, and again, Bruce touched on this, is bringing in some of the communities, be they First Nations or non-Aboriginal communities, bringing in those communities of interest, essentially all of the people who are interested in your industry, and making them part of those partnerships, either so that they can see the innovation that's happening, as well as provide ideas from outside of your normal space. It may be working with other industries who may or may not have a direct connection, but the connections may be there, be they the consumers of your products or people who just have ideas about your business that you wouldn't normally have connected with. So I think that's an area where we'll really see more innovation in the future, is innovative partnerships.
And the term we like to use at CMIC is the innovation ecosystem. So everyone within that ecosystem has an important role to play in advancing technology and innovation more generally. And as you mentioned, COSIA is another example. And it's about leveraging the assets and the expertise of each of those partners, de-risking the technology adoption and deployment, and really, again, just sharing all of the knowledge and success within that ecosystem. So,
yeah, I have to admit, I was disappointed that the talk that was supposed to be right before ours, or now, on, I guess it was the physics of...
the social physics of water.
Social physics of water. I think it would have been interesting to hear that talk, because I suspect there may have been some elements of that presentation that would touch on that, what I'm talking about here, about trying to bring in more of the communities of interest into our partnerships and innovating in that social engagement space.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, you alluded to this in your talk too, about having to give something up by working together. But I think companies, a lot of companies, at least in our experience, are recognizing that a lot of these challenges are pre-competitive, so they can really work together on them. And again, their collaboration has been a bit of a the mining industry has been lagging in many respects in terms of collaboration, but we're definitely seeing a shift, and it's not one that happens overnight, but there's certainly learnings that come with it, and definitely do see that as the way forward.
And again, I'm going to put a shout out to the forestry industry, because I think in a lot of ways they've done a very, very good job of developing those kind of partnerships and seeing the advantages globally to the industry of working together in a non-competitive space.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last question before we open it up to the floor, and you touched a little bit on it already, but the importance of innovation and technology in the resource sector. And we're talking a lot about millennials and youth and engaging their interests. And I can say from my experience that there's definitely, that perception out there that mining is this big, bad, menacing industry, especially among young people. It's not uniform, but there's definitely that perception out there. And again, I think we often take for granted, as I mentioned in my welcome remarks, the importance of the resource sectors and the mining industry. At least from my perspective, in helping to solve a lot of those societal challenges, such as climate change. So if you could speak a little bit more about the importance of it and the social license aspect and the broader societal benefits.
Right. Well, I think certainly for mining, and oil and gas, and forestry, the same, these three core foundational resource industries are global industries. So part of the innovation component is that we have to innovate to stay globally competitive. That's just the nature of the beast, is if we are going to be able to compete on a global stage, we have to be able to stay ahead of the curve. We have to innovate. We have to keep our costs down. We want to reduce consumables, especially energy consumption in this day and age of carbon pricing, looking for different ways to address that challenge. That's going to require a lot of innovation. And in another way, yes, we have to stay relevant to the public. If we want to stay active in developed countries, we need to make sure that we are engaging with the public, we're relevant to the public, and that we have public support for our industries. And I think that, again, is where we need to innovate in terms of our public engagement, the conversation, how to get more people into this room next year, how to get more people to understand that the resource industries are high-tech industries. And something that I mentioned to a couple of colleagues earlier is I quite often have heard the statistic in BC quoted that the high-tech sector now generates more jobs than mining, oil and gas, and forestry combined. But if you do a little research and digging into that number, have a look at BC Stats and how they classify what is considered to be high-tech, you find that quite a few of those companies that are classified as high-tech companies are in fact service companies providing services to mining, forestry, and oil and gas. So part of that issue is the social engagement, the public perception of our industry, and I think that's an area where we truly do need to innovate. And one of the things I'm going to touch again on Bruce's presentation, because over the last couple of years I've been involved a lot in public consultation around a mine, and one of the big issues is openness and transparency around data. And as Bruce presented, water is a big issue for the mining industry. I think it also is for oil and gas. I'm not sure whether it's as, well, it probably is for forestry too in terms of impacts on watershed and use of water. That's an area where I think we need to figure out a way to increase the public comfort with our industries by making more of our data publicly available. Find ways to make it more accessible, maybe more understandable, though it's always an issue. I know it's an issue that whenever we, in any research environment or any resource company releases data, there are people who will take it out of context, and there's a real challenge with managing that understanding and that perception of the data. But nonetheless, in my prior life, I actually worked with Geoscience BC, and one of the things that I can say with confidence is that when you go into a community meeting and people question your trustworthiness, apparently, or essentially whether they can trust you or not, when you can say that all the data that you are generating is available to anybody who wants to see it on your website, you'll find a lot of people go, oh, okay then. It just immediately reduces the amount of concern they have about what you're doing. And I can also say that this is a project we were doing in Northeast BC, generating huge amounts of data around subsurface water resources. And even though we got those questions, I don't think anybody from the general public ever downloaded those data sets from our website. They felt a level of comfort knowing that they were available. So I think that's a message that certainly those of us in the mining industry, we are challenged by this and by the public release of data, but I think it can go a long way to that, helping to address that public engagement and public trust. So.
Okay, I think we have 15 seconds left.
Oh, do we? Oh, I didn't think we were going to use that much time. I'm more.
Well, I think that was just our session, so we do have time for Q&A to open it up.
Yeah, so. And what we were talking about ahead of time is given this is a pretty small audience, and I suspect to a large degree we may be talking to people who are in the resource industries, we were just interested in hearing from the audience, or again, if there are questions for some of the other speakers, we have a bit more time now, so we thought we'd take advantage of that and make it a little bit more back and forth. So. Mike, do you want to be the moderator?
Sure. I think the only thing, just if you do have a question, if you could talk into the microphone, because they are recording, so yeah.
Now we got to find this guy a microphone. Oh, there we go.
Blinded by the light. Yeah.
Hi, Mike and Lynn, and Bruce. Ruben Carter, Exec Director of Service Reform with the BC Environmental Assessment Office. So we met in December,
right.
And I have my own personal capacity issue, which has meant that we haven't followed up. Talking about the Knowledge Hub, very excited about it and potentials in terms of collaboration. And directly on that point, you talk about innovative partnerships, talk about engagement, talk about public trust. And issues of public trust, of course, are not unique to industry, not unique to government. They're something which are quite endemic. In respect to data sharing, we touched on this in December, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to ask openly. Do you have a sense, do you have inputs, thoughts on where, via whom, which platforms, which agencies shares our collective data? And so if we're looking at something like the Knowledge Hub, for example, and industry is generating data, other sectors are generating data, government as well, of course, is presenting it. Where should that live? Is there a best place from the perspective of credibility and the most constructive possible narrative around sharing data?
That's a good question, and one that I know that, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in there with this one because I actually have an opinion on it, so.
Okay.
But it's a difficult one because certainly we had this conversation around the data sets that we generated at Geoscience BC when I was there. And Geoscience BC is a nonprofit organization, and Bruce, jump in if you want to say something on this too. But my personal opinion is that those sorts of data sets would best reside with the entity that's likely to be around the longest. And in that respect, I think that's the role of government, to be the archiver of public data. The access points can be a lot of different access points. And I think on that question of public trust and accessibility, sometimes it's easier to do the access point outside of government and outside of industry, definitely outside of academia. No offense to Lachlan or any other academics here, but that environment isn't necessarily conducive to managing and public access to large data sets. So I kind of see, again, it's a built-in partnership with all of those components contributing. The access point may be separate from the traditional entities, but again, my own personal opinion is that you want the data archived with the organization that's likely to be around the longest, and I suspect that that would be government. And others may have different opinions.
So I don't have a different opinion. I agree completely with what you said, and I think
Excellent.
that is the place, the ultimate place to store and keep long-term information. But the other side of the coin, though, is we have a huge opportunity now to generate real-time information and to make that public, and that's not the role of government. That's the role of the industry and so on. And there's examples of that already happening where operations are monitoring real-time dust, real-time vibration, and even potentially real-time water quality data that is publicly available real-time. And that is the ultimate openness and way to bring people on board with what you're doing so that they actually know what you're doing. So it's interesting when Gareth Manderson from Kitimat explained how he can look at data from his site while he's sitting here on his phone and data across the world. So the question, were he here, I'd ask him how much of that data would he be willing to put up routinely and available real-time for the general public to view?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer, obviously. I'm sure he probably would run out the door. But it's where we're going to potentially head, and if we're creative about that and bring people on board with that, I think it has huge potential for helping us.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point.
Yeah. I think, those were really excellent points, and I definitely agree with you both. And one of the things with CMIC is we do look at ourselves, and it's a view from industry as well, that we're a neutral, trusted party for some of their data. Of course, though, longevity is a concern, so I do have to look at those institutions that will survive. And John, to your point about real-time water quality monitoring, we're actually working on a project at CMIC to do just that. And there are projects around the world, from mine operations. Even in Newfoundland, they have a regulatory program where you can actually go on their website and see real-time information about bulk properties from mining operations. So they do exist. They're in their infancy, but I definitely agree that it's the way forward.
Anybody else with a question or a comment?
How do you see biotech and the bioeconomy influencing the resource sector in the future?
Well, I would say that the forestry industry today has shown that it's pretty big. For the mining industry, it's big and getting bigger. And I don't know, Lachlan, do you want to say something about that in terms of the whole genomics side of things and what you've been involved in? I don't think is there anybody here from Genome BC still? There was, oh, right there, okay. Different person, all right, well then I'd say Lachlan and then, yeah, from Genome to maybe say a few words on that.
Well, I think technology offers a huge role and is extremely important in the mining industry as well as forestry. And, you know, I think the whole discussion also around information and access to information and interpretation of information is important. You know, we can talk about information being available, but then, as Lynn alluded to, you know, there was that that interpretation of that information, and I think this relates also to, you know, to technology and understanding as we advance. It often becomes more challenging to relay that understanding to the general public, which is where we need to go, because as we've said, you know, there is that need for social acceptance and awareness in the natural resource field, and so I wonder if there's a sort of an intermediary role that could be played with the access to information and information sharing. And I'm not sure if this would be within a government context, because I completely agree that government should play that role. But you know, in our academic library systems, we have a service called Ask Away. And this is a live service. It's populated through the working hours. And anytime a student requires information, they can live chat, and there's going to be a response. And the responders are populated by libraries around Western North America, I think. It's quite a universal setup. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, you know, there is that link to information, so that those people interested in the knowledge they see, they can access online, be able to discuss it also real time online. Right. But who would support that? But you know, I think having that conduit of information to understanding, and that would also, I think, increase our acceptance of a high tech in our industries as well.
Right. And your question was, you were asking as well about the biotech applications to the resource industries, and I think, yeah, somebody from Genome BC. Oh, sorry, and
Genome BC.
Yeah, okay.
I'll grab it. I'll take chairman's prerogative and grab it.
Sure.
But then I'll pass it on. But what I would say, I emphasise that certainly from an FP Innovations perspective, the forest sector is a bioeconomy. It's not. It's like our discussion earlier defining the clean tech sector. I say, well, the natural resources sector is a clean tech sector. You can try and rebrand it, but it already is. And I would say, so in the same with the forest sector around bioeconomy, it is a biotech sector already. It chooses very carefully which trees it's going to replant, and it breeds them appropriately. It manages that resource, and then it maximises the add value from that material using a combination of, you know, engineering, chemistry, and biotechnology. But I think going forward, the biotech sector is going to be even more important, because the real problem in the bioeconomy, and I think Martin's experienced this with CANFOR, the real problem in the bioeconomy is similar to the rest of natural resources. It's managing choice. You've got multiple species here in BC. They all live on different parts of the country. They can be cut down in multiple different ways. They can be cut up in different ways in lumber and so forth. You can make different types of pulp, you can make different types of chemicals, and then you can turn them into thousands of other products and take them to hundreds of different markets. So the real challenge in the bioeconomy is managing choice. You have too much choice in the bioeconomy. That's really the problem. And so, you know, you have to make bold choices like CANFOR has and say, okay, there's a platform that works for us, and we'll make it work.
Right. Well, and in terms of innovative organizations, I think that's great. There's somebody here from Genome BC, because you guys are another one that are playing in that space between academia, industry, government, and bringing those pieces together.
Sure, I can just comment a little bit on that. As a neutral party, I guess, as you can say, we are able to play with industry and government and academics. I think the challenge for us as a funder of research in life sciences, really in biotech, if you want to call it that, and genomics, is we're finding we need to make sure our research is relevant. And so we can't just fund research in academia like we used to 15 years ago. That capacity is built. And we're not trying to find solutions to the research that it can solve. So we're actually getting input from industry as an advisory group, from government, and they set some of the top priorities for investing in research, which is important. And along with that, so that's been a big shift for us for the last 5 years. And having the ability to bring the public along has been huge, because the adoption of these technologies, you're not going to have any investment, particularly from government. We're partly funded by government, unless the public believes that there's a rigorous process, there's the appropriate applications of it in its test phase, and then scale up. So we're finding a lot of our activities also include the public engagement, education, outreach, and even educating the K-12 students so that they are aware of what options there are for technology and its applications in the future. Do you want me to leave it at that? I think the bioeconomy question was applied, but we are also, just so people know, our portfolio is growing. Typically, people see the applications of genomics in the health space. I mean, people think of cancer and that sort of thing. But where that technology is proven, it's more easily then exported into these other sectors. And Imperial Metals is one of the partners on some of the research that we're doing. We're doing stuff with Geoscience, BC, and other things. So we are seeing the applications in the natural resources sector, which is going to be a huge area for growth for BC and for the research area.
Thanks. Yeah, we talked a lot around it. I don't know whether we did answer your question or not, but there's lots of companies using biotech in the mining industry, and yeah. Oh, excellent. Okay, well, that's great. We'll get all of our cards then. And I'm starting to lose my voice, so I may be just about done. I don't know if that's the cue that we've used up our time. If anybody's watched this, Trevor, are you ready to kick us off the stage, or that work? Are you good, Mike?
Yep,
okay.
absolutely.
All right, well, that's it for us. Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much, everyone.